On today's episode of Wengel's Workshop, I'll be making a Gyuto kitchen knife from 1084 high carbon steel. This will be the second kitchen knife that I've made, and the thickness that I'm using is 3/32 of an inch, which is about like 0.09. It's a little thinner than 1/8 of an inch. So I traced out the template, and now I'm going to cut it out with the angle grinder before profiling it on the 2x72 grinder. On this channel, I tell the story behind various knife builds. If that sounds like something that would interest you, please consider subscribing. I'll finish the profiling with a multi-tool before heading on to marking out the pinhole placement and weight reduction holes. Now I'll be doing a Hamon on this knife, which is the second time doing a Hamon. Again, I'm using just some leftover refractory cement from my forge, putting it in place, and I figured out that with this stuff I need to get it right in the forge while it's still wet, otherwise it just falls right off. For those of you who don't know what a Hamon is, I'm essentially creating a visual quench line by insulating the back of the knife, in this case with heat resistant refractory cement, so that when I quench the blade, only the cutting edge is going to harden. Now when I etch it in acid, it will contrast that cutting edge that hardened versus the spine that didn't. Here's the knife all done with heat treatment. After I quenched it, I put it in the oven to temper for 2 2-hour cycles at 395 degrees. The reason you do this is it gives some toughness back to the steel, because after you quench it, the steel is just too hard and it can actually break or chip. After that, I will sand the flats down and then use some layout fluid and some drill bits to mark out the center line where I will grind the apex of the blade to. I forgot to mention before that I did no bevel grinding prior to heat treatment, and that's because I'm using thin steel and it's a fairly long blade. So since the knife is already heat treated, I have to be super careful not to overheat the steel while I'm grinding it. So I'll be using low grit belts, and I'll be dunking it in water often. Once I'm done grinding the bevels through 400 grit, I will put on the surface conditioning belts and go through 3 levels of surface conditioning belts. I'm going to spend a lot of time on these belts because I don't want to do any hand sanding, so I really want to spend a lot of time here and make sure the knife is polished well before I put it into the etch. It really is best to hand sand if you want to pull out the Hamon the best you can, but I think we're going to get pretty good results just with this. I'll be etching the blade using ferric chloride, and then I will neutralize that acid using baking soda. Now I'm going to go ahead and transfer the pinhole layout into the knife scales that I'll be using. I haven't shown these yet, but they are homemade burlap micarta, and they have black and orange G10 liners. I will trace the knife out onto the scales and then remove the excess material on the 2x72 grinder. So here's where we're at with the knife overall. Everything's ready to glue the scales on. So to glue the scales on, I'll be using West Systems G-Flex epoxy, mixing it up very well, and then applying it to all the surfaces and pinning it together using these copper nails that make it really easy to pin things together. Now I'll finish grinding the scales flush to the knife, and then I will use a router bit to round over the scales. Now I'm going to sand the scales from 150 grit up through 600 grit, and then I will take them over to the buffing wheel and buff them out. Now I'm going to go ahead and sharpen the knife. I'll point the edge in the same direction that the belt goes, and this helps prevent from the belt grabbing your edge and throwing the knife. So I'll start with an 80 grit, and I will create an even burr all the way across the edge. Once I can visibly see and feel that even burr, I'll move up through the grits up to 400 grit. After I'm done there, I will head over to the honing rod, which will help remove the burr, and then I'll strop the knife. After that, the knife should be nice and sharp and ready to cut things. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. And if you want to be notified when I upload new videos, please hit that notification bell. As always, thanks for watching.